Hello, heroes. Welcome once more back to the lair of OmnusI, which tonight doubled as my game space for my game of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons in the module Dark Days at Stoneholm. My group surviving into tonight's festivities. The fighter Steph, the fighter Terran, the dwarven priest Glim, the wizard Geth, or sorcerer Geth, sorry, the rogue Auric, and the GM NPC Glug, who is just pretty much Glug. The session tonight primarily was about beginning the quest to get at the bottom of what was creating the pockets of magical darkness within the city of Stoneholm. And as far as the players went, for the most part, they went along peaceably. They got a big bonus of getting paid for the first leg of their adventure, which was to investigate the glassworks, which cost them the lives of one of their characters. I allowed Steph to inherit the wealth that was promised to the player's former character Haldwin, so he had some cash on him. The group went off to spend it. The fighter went to upgrade his armor up to splint mail. The cleric basically shook down his own temple with a really good negotiation roll and a very poor one on my part to counter-negotiate, and ended up getting basically a free healing potion with his large order, as well as a free flask of holy water in addition to another bulk purchase. So, he did fairly well for the group, and I believe they pooled their cash to some extent to get these vital supplies. The noble sorcerer finally got his weak contract that he wanted with the brewers of Stoneholm. So he accomplished his personal mission, and darn if I didn't forget to give him his point of inspiration for finally doing that. So I gotta remember to do that next time. The other fighter, Steph, is a great weapons fighter, and he went out looking for a new greatsword. He already had a greatsword, and he wasn't going to get a magical one. So instead he found a weaponsmith who is a little on the crazy side and sold him this nasty, jagged, serrated greatsword, made with good steel. It looks intimidating as daylights, and in keeping with the way that I handle magical or just useful items, instead of actually giving him a magical weapon, he has a weapon that the very structure of it, if he brandishes it appropriately against an opponent who really does fear getting chopped up to little bits with this nasty looking sword, it may give him advantage on intimidation checks against certain types of enemies. So that was something he got for a little bit of extra role play and trying to fulfill the desires of his character. On the downside, the fighters look kind of ridiculous at this stage. One's carrying two large greatswords on his back. The other one has a greatsword and a halberd, which most people would think is rather excessive. Both of them are also carrying along other weapons, mostly for throwing. So the person with the javelin, or the halberd and greatsword, also has javelins, which are really nice dwarven javelins, meant to be reclaimed and used again and again. And I think somebody also has some hand axes in that mix. So they have a lot of weapons. It's kind of going into D&D character bloat, but we'll see how that turns out. Especially if they start getting disadvantage for all of the ridiculous things they're carrying when they try to do acrobatic or athletic checks. So the first part of the night was spent shopping and spending the 200 gold each one of them had. For the most part, they didn't spend a truly ridiculous amount. I think most of them still have some reserves, although now they have some healing potions to spread out, which is good. Oh, and I also gave the possibility from the temple of wearing a helm that has two potion slots with a straw. And anybody who's seen the kind of crass batting style helmet with the carry cups for having a couple of cold beverages at a time. It's the same concept, but the neat idea that I had for it was that he paid 50 something gold. And what this allows him to do is he can put 2 potions in, and he can drink them as a bonus action if he uses the helm. If the helm doesn't get damaged, if the potions don't get damaged on the helm, because combat can be a chaotic thing, I see him using it. Oh yeah, that actually could be a really neat item. And the fact that all he has to do is inhale and suck up some healing potion, hey, that's kind of a neat thing. It might give him a little extra staying power, and staying power is something that he can use. The group was starting out at first level, on the cusp of going up to second. They just need a little bit more experience. So they finally had their meeting. Oh, first of all, actually, when we started the night, remembering the prior kind of bad luck session, really train wrecky session, most of the group was actually in prison. So the 2 heroes who were not in prison had a seal for their release, brought them in, and got them released. They got to personally know the bailiff and the head secretary to the dwarven justice system. Cranky old lady, but she was also smart enough not to pile on them too heavily. The ones who were in prison were doused with soapy water for their hygiene, but other than that, they were pretty much left alone to think about what they had done. Well, they got out, and they hadn't thought too much about what they had done. But on the other hand, the person who threw them in jail wasn't around. They didn't have anybody they could really vent any kind of frustration on, so they went about their business. They went to the inn to rest out the night. And also, so that they could progress the plot the next day, they were supposed to meet with the grand advisor for the king, named Ston Deppenhut. I love guttural dwarven names. So, at any rate, they go in, they get their rooms, they sleep. Halfway through the night, they're awoken by the sounds of a fight. Another wave of darkness had come up. It's a good thing to keep combat and keep the adventure going along. So they sleepily stumble out, and they find this giant shadow is fighting off several members of the town guard who are basically trying to fight for their lives. The party runs to the bazaar where the fight is taking place, which gives the missile characters a chance that they can shine for a second before the melee guys come up and just mulch whatever's in front of them. The melee person in this case, the range person in this case is Auric, who is uncorked his bow, and he's firing shots at long range at disadvantage. Tactically, it allows him to hurt the thing a little bit, but it's not until the end of the fight that that really takes effect. Once Geth gets close enough, he starts uncorking his spells, finds out that his Chill Touch and Ray of Frost aren't very effective against giant undead shadows. So he's a little downturned by that. The rest of the group eventually get into melee, guarding the dwarves who had been knocked askew by this giant. They found out that the thing had already been fairly weakened, and they were able to dogpile on it, really. Even though their weapons only did half damage, they still connected enough times. The thing didn't have a great armor class. I am kind of enjoying having monsters that don't need a high armor class to still be a challenge. It cuts down some of the frustration that even having fighters who have a hard time hitting their opponents it's frustrating, especially first level. So the monster only had an 11 armor class, so they beat him. And is the giant shadow in the book? No, I've been expanding and creating creatures kind of on the fly, or adapting creatures that are already in the book. So, party fights the shadow. It died because of one last really good shot from Auric, and they won their battle. So they went back to bed. No celebration there. They let the guards take care of it. The one person who got hurt, I believe, was Terran, the eldest fighter of the group, and he was healed by a cleric nearby. So they went back to bed. They rested, got up. That's when they all went about their own separate ways, doing all the things that I described earlier. Finally, it came time to go to the Golden Pick, which is the grand restaurant of the town, and they went to talk to the advisor, Staun. And Staun, again, is this huge, obese dwarf. He talks very jowly like this. And he, of course, has all the proper contempt for the lesser-lived races of the half-orcs and the humans. And, of course, he conceals it beneath a veneer of diplomacy and decorum, but he's chowing through his food in a most disgusting fashion, and giving the party hints and tips as to what they're going to do next. So the party finds out that Staun has a suspicion about where this darkness is coming from. Apparently there's a clan of goblins that infested a sandstone warren, and they also have been known to produce these little rubies that create dark effects. Seems like they've got the perfect culprit ahead of them, so they get turned loose by Deppenklut. And, the party has some chit-chat, nothing too serious. They really don't like the guy. He's a little too oily for them. And as a result, they go in, they eat, of course. He offers them food, and they just don't make much of a dent in the food that he's going to eat. And then they go about their merry way. They had this idea that they were going to go into the sewers because they had a tip-off that the different bursts of shadow seem to originate from areas that are up top of sewer lines. They were then told that the sewers for the dwarves aren't the big cavernous things you can just walk along. They're actually 3-foot tall pipes that basically are half submerged most of the time because they're dwarven efficient. They aren't huge and take up lots and lots of space. They're periodically flushed, and any trouble to them, there's a separate group of dwarves who have the magical gear and training to go in and either weed out monsters that are infesting it or clear out clogs and things like that. They actually make do pretty well with the crafting magics and connections they have to stone that makes the town. So they kind of get dissuaded from going down into the sewers because, again, the sewers are relatively small. People like Glug would have a really hard time. But they do investigate it. They go to one of the sewer outflow tunnels. Basically, there are rooms that have storage for all the things and an access from the above ground. Well, the problem with it is they go as a whole party. And the place that they go to is in the middle of the dwarven sector where not a lot of outsiders are. So they go with a huge hulking half-orc. Okay. 3 humans. Okay. And, yeah, that gets a lot of people's attention. And it doesn't help that the choleric cleric of the war god of the dwarves, Clengen Silverbeard, he's not subtle in any sort of way. Technically, most of them aren't really subtle, with the exception of Auric, who is a rogue, and he's frustrated at the lack of stealth the group has. So while he's examining the lock, everyone else is around him just talking as normal. The dwarves who are around them, because they're in the middle of a city, go, I wonder what they're doing clustered around that government building that leads down to the sewers. So they ran for the guards. I didn't want to choke off the group from pursuing this completely. I wanted to give them a chance. So I rolled a check against Glug's wisdom. When the guards came, Glug decided it was time to be the distraction that he's good at being. So he went over to the dwarves, rolling his intimidation check, and puts his arms over their shoulders and asks if they want to be part of the Dwarf-Orc Friendship League. He really likes dwarves. He thinks they're great. And, yeah, it actually works for a little while, giving Auric several rolls against that lock. He doesn't make them, but he tries. And when the time is, he's rolled several times, he finally just says, okay, that's it. I don't even want to go down there anyhow. So the group gives up on the sewer league. They go off and they sleep again. Nothing really comes of it. Glug, not knowing how much time he needed to buy for them, was eventually getting down to starting to tell dead baby jokes, which never works. And he was, Terran basically pulled him away and said, okay, let's go. And so they got away without getting in jail again, which is good. So they rested again. Nothing of any great import happened, and they got off on their way the next day. They thought about renting some cave spiders to help them get there fast, but they poo-pooed the idea because it was really expensive. So they trekked off. I don't believe they had anything else major that they did in between. So the journey that they took, for the most part, wasn't anything too eventful. I'm going to make them make some survival checks, but they've got a map, so they know pretty much the direction they have to go. So they eventually get to this cliff. It's covered with jagged protrusions, and the top of it is very sharp. It's made of a black, kind of a, I picture it as kind of like an onyx or jet, blackened glass style protrusions. So Glug climbs up. He does well. He just gets cut up a little bit trying to make the climb. But he's got really good acrobatics or athletics checks, so he gets up no problem. He holds the rope for everybody else. There's a post there, but Glug can't tie knots to save his life. Just rolled, and yeah, he rolled a 1 on his survival. They still don't like the players sometimes. So the players get up, or Glug gets up. He's holding the rope. Terran gets up. Manages to make it without a problem. Did I mention at the bottom of this there's all kinds of stone stalagmites that are threatening to skewer anybody who might fall? Oh yeah, those are there. They can see it. That's like watching the executioner's axe over your head. You have a feeling somebody's going to fall on that. But they climbed. Then the next person to start climbing was Glim, the cleric. And just as they're going up, Glim gets over the top after some harrowing climbs, and again, getting a little nicked up. He gets over the edge, and he sees a large purple bug-like creature with long arms with huge bony hooks at the end coming up to nail Terran from behind with a surprise attack. Doesn't have a chance to help him. Bam, it nails Terran. If you haven't recognized from the description and haven't seen one modernly, it's a creature called a hook horror. It's a classic D&D monster. And I actually have a miniature for it that I like to pull out. So, the group knew they had to face it. At this time, unfortunately, the player for Steph had to leave, so he was then controlled by Terran's character, so he was controlling 2 fighters. Both of those characters were up on top of the cliff, trying to fight back against the hook horror. Hook horrors are tougher opponents. They're challenge rating 3. But there was only 1, and the group was kind of at a disadvantage because they were split up. Some were at the top, some were at the bottom. With an interesting scenario that you had this cliff, anybody trying to go up was going to have a difficult time of doing it. And Terran had been trying to reinforce the rope that was slowly getting frayed as they were climbing up it by finding links of chain. The dwarves actually had a chain ladder that they used, which made the climb relatively simple. The guys didn't have that, so instead they were trying to use the scrap chain links to make kind of a shroud around the rope so that it wouldn't get frayed as quickly, so that they could get up. I thought it was a clever idea, and let them try it. So the hook horror came in. The group immediately, the strategy was, and it was relatively easy because one person coming up with the idea, the player for the fighters decided he was going to have the fighters move around the hook horror and push it over the cliff. Okay. Terran used his second wind so he could get some healing back, and he dared the hook horror to hit him. I think the hook horror did hit him on the second shot. Did some more damage to him, but not enough to take him down. At this time, Glug would do what Glug does. He attacked him with a great axe, and he hit. I was rolling well for Glug. He nailed that thing, and the hook horror turned around and lashed into him with his claws, while the group below was trying to offer missile fire up. But because they were back on the cliff a little bit, it had cover from the edge of the cliff. So that cover stopped it from getting peppered full of arrows from Oric, and also from getting blasted with rays of frost from Geth. So the fire continued on, the fighting kept on. Terran used a strategy of aiding Steth with the pushing. So Steth would push at advantage. Advantage being a wonderful little addition to 5th edition. When you have advantage, you just roll 2 dice and take the best. 2 dice taking the best at equivalent strength to the hook horror meant a decided advantage, and every time they tried it, they succeeded at pushing the hook horror closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. This had 2 benefits. Number 1, it was closer to the edge of the cliff, and number 2, it lost its cover so that the missile fire raining up could do something good for them. Unfortunately for Glug, his luck ran out. The hook horror is a nasty melee fighter, and it slashed him twice. The first blow would have taken him down, because he had taken the first blow the prior round. But because he is a half-orc, he has the ability to go down to 1 hit point instead of 0 the first time that happens. Well, the second one hit. Glug goes down. Fortunately for him, and to some extent the rest of the group, the fighters managed to push the hook horror over the edge of the cliff, and I let them roll. The funny thing is, a common repeating trend is that guy who plays the fighter does a pretty good job of coming up with some strategies, but he can't roll to capitalize on some of them sometimes. He rolled really poor damage for the fall, and excellent damage for the stalagmite spearings. But he didn't roll enough damage to kill the thing, and he just dropped this melee monster on top of the rogue and the sorcerer. Not physically, they were offset, they were that smart. But now the fighters were on top, away from the monster. So the fighters both rained down javelins and hand axes down at the monster. The rest of the group tried shooting it. The rogue didn't want to get close, so he shot at his bow, even though it's a range attack and the thing was prone, so he didn't get advantage. He actually had disadvantage to the shot, which he accepted because he didn't want to get close. But he didn't move away either, so the thing just got up and went over and whoosh, mulched him. He didn't have a chance, really. The thing just does way too much damage, and he dropped it at first level. Fortunately, the rest of the remaining fire took down the hook horror. They met a Svirfneblin, deep gnome, who watched the whole thing, named Benny. I love NPCs named Benny. And he, gave them some words of comfort, letting them know that these kind of underdark horrors are the kind of things, they're kind of swelling up. Apparently food is scarce down below, so these things are more common. They bid Benny goodbye and kept going on their quest. Oh, one other thing too. This was the fight that ended the night, but a couple of hilarious things did happen. Once they brought Glug back to consciousness with a well-placed healing spell, and the group was, for the most part, together. The others who were down below had to climb up that rope still. Well, the rogue went up it without too much difficulty. Took a few nicks and cuts here. The whole group is kind of banged up and probably should rest. As a reminder, guys, you probably should rest. You took a beating. I don't think I really have to remind them, but we'll see. But the rope was fraying, and the chain links gave way, so the rope was fraying as Geth was trying to climb up as the lightest of the group. The rope was frayed to half. Glug saw this, and he, again, I was kind of feeling a little frisky with poor Glug. He decided that this was the time he was going to find out if he was actually a born sorcerer. So he stood over them and put his hands over the rope and went mending, 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 mending. And the actual cleric who had the mending spell snuck up behind him and mended the rope. So the rope is fine. Glug now thinks that he is a sorcerer. So, unfortunately, Geth is not very physically inclined, and the cuts and things that he was taking up really took a toll on him. Finally, he botched a roll and was going to plummet down to his death onto the stalactites. the guys were going to try to pull him up, but he couldn't get up fast enough, and the guys took forever to figure out that they could probably help him out by cheese gratering him up the cliff. But I allowed him to make a dexterity save to avoid the death that he was going to face. Otherwise, he was going to plummet down. The guys could not have gotten down fast enough to help him. Odds were pretty good he was going to die. He made his saving throw, which basically meant he stuck his hand, coiled it around the rope. Now, the downside to this was he hit the wall and he took enough damage to get knocked out. So now he's free falling except his hand, which, like I said, I gave him the saving throw, so he wasn't going to die from it, but it badly dislocated his wrist, and he jerked down, just held up by his arm. So the guys pulled him up, and the cleric quickly healed him so that he didn't die again. And because it's magical healing, it healed the dislocated wrist. But it wasn't because of Glug, because Glug the whole time was going, Telkinis, 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 Telkinis. I just had him rolling really well for a couple of intelligence rolls to know something about Arcana, about what a sorcerer would do in a situation like that. So he was trying to will him up. They couldn't make that fly, so Glug knows he's not a sorcerer of that level yet. And yeah, they got him up. They're all on top of the ledge at this point. They're badly beat up. But that's where we find ourselves at the end of this State of the Dungeon address. Will the adventurers continue on and find these evil fell-toothed goblins in the Sandstone Warrens? Maybe. They've got a ways to go yet. They aren't quite there. But we have promise. We have teamwork, which is looking good. And yeah, I think we're having some good give and take between players and myself. I look forward to revealing the next leg of their adventure. Next week, though, Werewolves of the Caribbean once more. We have gone past the planning phase, and next phase is over the Moon Bridge to more umbral exercises that'll get them closer to where the Phoenix Dagger that they're looking for is. So we'll see what that brings. I'm OmnusI here in the lair of OmnusI, and that is my State of the Dungeon address. I bid all of you safe travels.